Hi, my sweet friends, and welcome back to Crochet Every Day with Judy. We're continuing reading from Robinson Crusoe, and today we're starting with Chapter 8, 10 Years of Work, Part 2. And I'm not sure exactly where I left off, but this is where I will start. But in all this while, I made no allowance for the dangers of such a condition and how I might fall into the hands of savages, and perhaps such as I might have reason to think far worse than the lions and tigers of Africa. If I once came into their power, I should run a hazard more than 1,000 to 1 of being killed, and perhaps of being eaten, for I had heard that the people of the Caribbean coast were cannibals or meat-eaters, and I knew by the latitude that I could not be far from that shore. All these things I say, which I ought to have considered well, and which I did cast up in my thoughts afterwards, yet aroused none of my apprehensions at first. Excuse me. My mind ran mightily upon the thoughts of getting over to that shore. At last I thought I would go and look at our ship's boat. She was blown up upon the shore a great way in the storm when we were first cast away. She lay almost where she did at first, but not quite, and was turned by the force of the waves and the winds almost bottom upwards against a high ridge of rough sand, but there was water about her as before. Had I had hands to have refitted her and have launched her into the water, the boat would have done well enough, and I might have gone back into the Brazils with her easily enough. I might have foreseen, however, that I could no more turn her and set her upright upon her bottom than I could remove the island. However, I went to the wood and cut levers and rollers and brought them to the boat, resolving to try what I could do. I suggested to myself that if I could but turn her down, I might easily repair the damage she had received, and she would be a very good boat, and I might go to sea in her very easily. I spared no pains indeed in this piece of fruitless toil, and spent, I think, 3 or 4 weeks about it. At last, finding it impossible to heave it up with my little strength, I fell to digging away the sand to undermine it, and so to make it fall down, setting pieces of wood to thrust and guide it right in the fall. But when I had done this, I was unable to stir it up again, or to get under it, much less to move it forward toward the water, so I was forced to give it up. Yet though I gave up hopes of the boat, my desire to venture over increased in the main, rather than decreased, as the means for it seemed impossible. This at length set me to thinking whether it was not possible to make myself a canoe or periagua, such as the natives of those climates make, even without tools, of the trunk of a great tree. This I not only thought possible, but easy, and pleased myself extremely with my thoughts of making it, and with my having much more convenience for it than any of the Negroes or Indians. However, I did not at all consider the particular inconvenience which I lay under more than the Indians did, that is, the want of hands to move it into the water when it was made. This was a difficulty much harder for me to surmount than all the consequences of want of tools could be to them. But my thoughts were so intent upon my voyage over the sea in it that I never once considered how I should get it off the land. It was really in its own nature easier for me to guide it over 45 miles of sea than over 45 fathom of land from where it lay to set it afloat in the water. I went to work upon this boat and pleased myself with the plan, without determining whether I was able to undertake it. The difficulty of launching my boat came often into my head, but I put a stop to my own inquiries into it by this foolish answer which I gave myself. Let me first make it. I will warrant I will find some way or other to get it along when it is done. This was a most preposterous method, but the eagerness of my fancy prevailed, and to work I went and felled a cedar tree. I question much whether Solomon ever had such a one for building the temple of Jerusalem. It was 5 feet 10 inches in diameter at the lower part next the stump, and 4 feet 11 inches in diameter at the end of 22 feet, after which it lessened for a while and then parted into branches. It was not without infinite labor that I felled this tree. I was 20 days hacking and hewing it at the bottom. I was 14 more getting the branches and limbs and the vast spreading head of it cut off, which I hacked and hewed through with my axe and hatchet with inexpressible labor. After this, it cost me a month to shape it and rub it to a proportion, and to something like the bottom of a boat, that it might swim upright as it ought. It cost me nearly 3 months more to clear the inside and work it out so as to make an exact boat of it. This I did indeed without fire, by mere mallet and chisel, and by the dint of hard labor, till I had made it into a very handsome periagua, big enough to have carried 26 men, and consequently big enough to have carried me and all my cargo. The boat was really much bigger than I had ever in my life seen a canoe or periagua that was made of one tree. Many a weary stroke it had cost, you may be sure, and now there remained nothing but to get it into the water. Had I succeeded in this, I make no question but I should have begun the maddest voyage and the most unlikely to be performed that ever was undertaken. But all my devices to get the boat into the water failed me, though they cost infinite labor too. It lay about 100 yards from the water and not more, but the first inconvenience was that it was uphill toward the creek. Well, to take away this discouragement, I resolved to dig into the surface of the earth and so make a declivity. This I began, and it cost me a prodigious deal of pains, but what man grudges pains when he has his deliverance in view? But when this was worked through, and this difficulty managed, things were a little better, for I could no more stir the canoe than I could the other boat. Then I measured the distance of ground, and resolved to cut a canal to bring the water up to the canoe, since I could not bring the canoe down to the water. Well, I began this work, and when I began to enter into it and calculated how deep it was to be dug, how broad, how the stuff to be thrown out, I found that by the number of hands I had, being none but my own, it must have been 10 or 12 years before I should have gone through with it. The shore lay high, so that at the upper end it must have been at least 20 feet deep. At length, though with great reluctance, I gave this attempt up also. This grieved me heartily, and now I saw, though too late, the folly of beginning a work before we count the cost and before we judge rightly of our own strength to go through with it. In the middle of this work, I finished my 4th year in this place, and kept my anniversary with the same devotion and with as much comfort as ever before. By a constant study and serious application of the Word of God, and by the assistance of His grace, I had gained a different knowledge from that I had had before. I entertained different notions of things. I looked now upon the world as a thing remote, which I had nothing to do with, no expectation from, and indeed no desires about. In a word, I had nothing indeed to do with it, nor was likely to have. So I thought it looked, as we may perhaps look upon it hereafter, as a place I had lived in, but was come out of. And well might I say, as Father Abraham to Dives, between me and thee there is a great gulf fixed. In the first place, I was removed from all the wickedness of the world here. I had neither the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye, nor the pride of life. I had nothing to covet, for I had all I was now capable of enjoying. I was lord of the manor, or if I pleased, I might call myself king or emperor over the whole country which I had possession of. There were no rivals. I might have raised shiploads of grain, but I had no use for it, so I let as little grow as I thought enough for my occasion. I had tortoises or turtles enough, but one now and then was as much as I could put to any use. I had timber enough to have built a fleet of ships. I had grapes enough to have made wine, or to have cured into raisins, to have loaded that fleet when it had been built. I had, as I hinted before, a parcel of money as well gold as silver, about 36 pounds sterling. Alas, there the nasty, sorry, useless stuff lay. I had no use for it, and I often thought with myself that I would have given a handful of it for a gross of tobacco pipes, or for a hand mill to grind my corn. Nay, I would have given it all for 6 penny worth of turnip and carrot seed out of England, or for a handful of peas and beans and a bottle of ink. I had now been here so long that many things which I brought on shore for my help were either quite gone or very much wasted and nearly spent. My ink, as I observed, had been gone for some time, all but a very little, which I eked out with water a little and a little, till it was so pale it scarcely left any appearance of black upon the paper. As long as it lasted, I made use of it to mark down the days of the month on which any remarkable thing happened to me, and first, by casting up times past, I remembered that there was a strange concurrence of days in the various fates which befell me, and which, if I had been superstitiously inclined to observe days as fatal or fortunate, I might have had reason to have looked upon with a great deal of curiosity. First, I had observed that on the anniversary of the day that I broke away from my father and my friends and ran away to Hull in order to go to sea, the same day afterwards I was taken by the Sally man-of-war and made a slave. 1 year from the very day that I escaped out of the wreck of that ship in Yarmouth Roads, I made my escape from Sally in the boat. The 30th of September, on my 26th birthday, I had my life miraculously saved when I was cast on shore on this island, so that my wicked life and my solitary life both began on the same day. The next thing to give out after my ink were the biscuits which I had brought out of the ship. This I had husbanded to the last degree, allowing myself but 1 piece of bread a day for more than a year, and yet I was quite without bread for nearly a year before I got any grain of my own. Great reason I had to be thankful, too, that I had any at all, forgetting it was, as has been already observed, next to miraculous. My clothes, too, began to decay mightily. I had had no linen for a great while, except some checkered shirts, which I found in the chests of the other seamen, and which I carefully preserved, because many times I could bear no clothes on but a shirt. It was a very great help to me that I had among all the men's clothes of the ship almost 3 dozen shirts. There were also several thick watch coats of the seamen's, but they were too hot to wear. Though it is true that the weather was so violently hot that there was no need of clothes, yet I could not go quite naked, nor could I bear the thought of it, though I was all alone. One reason why I could not go quite naked was that I could not bear the heat of the sun so well when quite naked as with some clothes on. The very heat frequently blistered my skin, whereas if I had a shirt on, the air itself made some motion, and whistling under the shirt made me twofold cooler than I should have been without it. No more could I ever bring myself to go out in the heat of the sun without a cap or a hat. The heat of the sun beating with such violence as it does in that place would give me the headache presently, so that I could not bear it, whereas if I put on my hat, it would presently go away. As I thought these things over, I began to consider about putting the few rags I had, which I called clothes, into some order. I had worn out all the waistcoats I had, and my business was now to try to make jackets out of the great watch coats which I had by me, and with such other materials as I had. Accordingly, I set to work tailoring, or rather, indeed, botching, for I made the most piteous work of it. However, I made shift to make 2 or 3 waistcoats, which I hoped would serve me a great while. As for breeches or drawers, I made but a very sorry shift indeed till afterwards. Excuse me. I have mentioned that I saved the skins of all animals that I killed. I hung them up stretched out with sticks in the sun, by which means some of them were so dry and hard that they were fit for little, but others, it seems, were very useful. The first thing I made of these was a great cap for my head with the hair on the outside to shoot off the rain. I did this so well that after this I made a suit of clothes wholly of these skins, that is to say, a waistcoat and breeches open at the knees, both loose, for they were rather wanted to keep me cool than to keep me warm. I must not omit to acknowledge that they were wretchedly made, for if I was a bad carpenter, I was a worse tailor. However, they were such as I made very good shift with, and when I was abroad, if it happened to rain, the hair of the waistcoat and cap being outmost, I was kept very dry. After this, I spent a great deal of time and pains to make me an umbrella. I was indeed of great want of one, and had a great mind to make one. I had seen them made in the Brazils, where they are very useful in the great heat which is there. I felt the heat every jot as great here, and greater too, being near the equinox. Besides, as I was obliged to be much abroad, it was a most useful thing to me, as well as for the rains as the heat. I took a world of pains at it, and was a great while before I could make anything likely to hold. Indeed, after I thought I had hit the way, I spoiled 2 or 3 before I made one to my mind, but at last I made one that answered indifferently well. The main difficulty I found was to make it let down. I could make it to spread, but if it did not let down too and draw in, it would not be portable for me anyway, but just over my head, which would not do. However, at last, as I said, I made one to answer. I covered it with skins, the hair upwards, so that it cast off the rain like a penthouse, and kept off the sun so effectually that I could walk out in the hottest of the weather with greater advantage than I could before in the coolest. When I had no need of it, I could close it and carry it under my arm. Thus I lived mighty comfortably, my mind being entirely composed by resigning to the will of God and throwing myself wholly upon the disposal of his providence. I cannot say that after this, for 5 years, any extraordinary thing happened to me, but I lived on in the same course, in the same place, just as before. I had my yearly labor of planting my barley and rice and curing my raisins, of which I always kept just enough to have sufficient stock of the year's provisions beforehand. Besides these, I undertook the task of making my daily labor of going out with my gun. I had too a canoe, which at last I finished. By digging a canal to it 6 feet wide and 4 feet deep, I brought it into the creek almost half a mile away. However, though my little periagua was finished, yet the size of it was not at all sufficient for the design which I had in view when I made the first. I had planned to venture over to the land which I had seen, where it was more than 40 miles broad. Accordingly, the smallness of my boat assisted to put an end to that design, and now I thought no more of it. But as I had a boat, my next design was to make a tour around the island. I had been on the other side in one place, crossing, as I have already described it, over the land, and the discoveries that I had made in that journey had made me very eager to see other parts of the coast. Now that I had a boat, I thought of nothing but sailing round the island. For this purpose, and that I might do everything with discretion and consideration, I fitted up a little mast to my boat, and made a sail to it out of some of the pieces of the ship's sails, of which I had a great store by me. Having fitted my mast and sail and tried the boat, I found that she would sail very well. Then I made little lockers and boxes at each end of my boat to put provisions, necessaries, and ammunition into, to be kept dry either from rain or the spray of the sea. I cut a little long hollow place in the inside of the boat where I could lay my gun, making a flap to hang down over it to keep it dry. I fixed my umbrella also in a step at the stern, like a mast, to stand over my head and keep the heat of the sun off me like an awning. Thus I every now and then took a little voyage upon the sea, but never went far out, nor far from the little creek. But at last, being eager to view the circumference of my little kingdom, I resolved upon my tour, and accordingly I supplied my ship with food for the voyage, putting in 24 of my loaves, cakes I should rather call them, of barley bread, an earthen pot full of parched rice, a food I ate a great deal of, a little bottle of rum, half a goat, and powder with shot for killing more, and 2 large watch coats, which I took, one to lie upon, and the other to cover me in the night. It was the 6th of November, in the 6th year of my reign, or my captivity, whichever you please, that I set out on this voyage. I found it much longer than I expected, for though the island itself was not very large, yet when I came to the east side of it, I found that a great ledge of rocks lay out about 2 leagues into the sea, some above water, some under it. Beyond this, there was a shoal of sand lying dry half a league more, so that I was obliged to go a great way out to sea to double that point. When I first discovered them, I was going to give up my attempt and come back again, not knowing how far it might oblige me to go out to sea, and above all, doubting how I should get back again. Accordingly, I came to anchor, for I had made me a kind of anchor, with a piece of broken grappling which I got out of the ship. Having secured my boat, I took my gun and went on shore, climbing up a hill which seemed to overlook that point where I saw the full extent of it. In my viewing the sea from that hill where I stood, I perceived a strong and indeed a most furious current which ran to the east and even came close to the point. I took the more notice of it because I saw that there might be some danger that when I came into it, I might be carried out to sea by the strength of it and not be able to make the island again. And indeed, had I not gotten first upon this hill, I believe it would have been so, for there was the same current on the other side of the island, only that it set it off at a farther distance. I saw that there was a strong eddy under the shore, so I had nothing to do but to get out of the first current, and I should presently be in an eddy. I lay here, however, 2 days, because the wind blowing pretty fresh, east at southeast, and that being just contrary to the current, made a heavy surf upon the point, so that it was not safe for me to keep too close to the shore on account of the surf, nor to go too far off because of the current. The 3rd day in the morning, the wind having abated overnight, the sea was calm, and I ventured. But I am a warning example, again, to all rash and ignorant pilots. No sooner was I come to the point when I was not my boat's length from the shore, but I found myself in a great depth of water and a current like the sluice of a mill. It carried my boat along with it with such violence that all I could do could not keep her so much as on the edge of it, but I found it hurried me farther and farther out from the eddy, which was on the left hand. There was no wind stirring to help me, and all that I could do with my paddle signified nothing. And now I began to give myself up for lost, for as the current was on both sides of the island, I knew that in a few leagues' distance they must join again, and then I was irrecoverably gone. I saw no possibility of avoiding it, so that I had no prospect before me but of perishing, not by the sea, for that was calm enough, but by starving. I had indeed found a tortoise on the shore, as big almost as I could lift, and had tossed it into the boat, and I had a great jar of fresh water. But what was all this to being driven into the vast ocean, where, to be sure, there was no shore, no mainland or island, for 1,000 leagues at least? However, I worked hard, till indeed my strength was almost exhausted, and kept my boat as much to the northward, that is, toward the side of the current which the eddy lay on, as I possibly could. About noon, as the sun passed the meridian, I thought I felt a little breeze of wind in my face springing up from the southeast. This cheered my heart a little, and especially when in about half an hour more it blew a small, gentle gale. By this time I was at a frightful distance from the island, and had the least cloud or hazy weather intervened, I had been undone another way too. I had no compass on board, and should never have known how to steer toward the island if I had but once lost sight of it. But the weather continued clear, and I applied myself to get up my mast again, and spread my sail, standing away to the north as much as possible to get out of the current. This eddy carried me about a league in my way back again directly toward the island, but about 2 leagues more toward the northward than the current lay, which carried me away at first, so that when I came near the island, I found myself open to the northern shore of it, that is to say, the other end of the island, opposite to that which I went out from. When I had made something more than a league of way by the help of this current or eddy, I found that it was spent and served me no further. However, I found that since I was to the west of the island between the 2 great currents, that on the south side, which had hurried me away, and that on the north, which lay about 2 leagues on the other side, the water was at least still and running no way. I had still a breeze of wind fair for me, and I kept on steering directly for the island, though not making such headway as I did before. Excuse me. About 4 o'clock in the afternoon, being then within about a league of the island, I stretched across this eddy, slanting northwest, and in about an hour came within a mile of the shore. It being smooth water, I soon got to land. When I was on shore, I fell on my knees and gave God thanks for my deliverance, resolving to lay aside all thoughts of my deliverance by my boat. Refreshing myself with such things as I had, I brought my boat close to the shore in a little cove that I had espied under some trees, and laid me down to sleep, being quite spent with the labor and fatigue of the voyage. I was now at a great loss which way to get home with my boat. I had run so much risk, and knew too much the case to think of attempting it by the way I went out. What might be at the other side I knew not, nor had I any mind to run any more ventures. I only resolved in the morning to make my way westward along the shore, and to see if there was any creek where I might lay up my frigate in safety, so as to have her again if I wanted her. In about 3 miles or thereabouts, coasting the shore, I came to a very good inlet or bay, about a mile over, which narrowed till it came to a very little rivulet or brook, where I found a convenient harbor for my boat, and where she lay as if she had been in a little dock made on purpose for her. Here I put in, and having stowed my boat very safe, I went on shore to look about me and see where I was. I soon found I had but a little passed by the place where I had been before when I traveled on foot to that shore. So taking nothing out of my boat but my gun and my umbrella, for it was exceedingly hot, I began my walk. The way was comfortable enough after such a voyage as I had been upon, and I reached my old bower in the evening, where I found everything standing as I left it, for I always kept it in good order, it being, as I said before, my country house. I got over the fence and lay down in the shade to rest my limbs, for I was very weary. I soon fell asleep, but judge if you can that you read my story what a surprise I had when I was awakened out of my sleep by a voice calling me by my name several times. "Robin, Robin, Robin Crusoe, poor Robin Crusoe, where are you, Robin Crusoe, where are you, where have you been?" I was so dead asleep at first, being fatigued with rowing or paddling, as it is called, the first part of the day, and walking the latter part, that I did not awaken thoroughly. Dozing between sleeping and waking, I thought I dreamed that somebody spoke to me, but as the voice continued to repeat, "Robin Crusoe, Robin Crusoe," at last I began to awake more perfectly. I was at first dreadfully frightened, and started up in the utmost consternation. But no sooner were my eyes open than I saw my Paul sitting on the top of the hedge, and immediately knew that this was he that spoke to me, for just in such bemoaning language I had used to talk to him and teach him. He had learned it so perfectly that he would sit upon my finger and lay his bill close to my face and cry, "Poor Robin Crusoe, where are you? Where have you been? How came you here?" and such things as I had taught him. However, even though I knew it was the parrot, and that indeed it could be nobody else, it was a good while before I could compose myself. I was amazed how the creature got thither, and that he should just keep about the place and nowhere else, but as I was well satisfied it could be nobody but honest Paul, I got over my fright. I held out my hand and called him by his name, and the sociable creature came to me and sat upon my thumb as he was used to doing, and continued talking to me just as if he was overjoyed to see me again. When I went home I carried him along with me. I had had enough of rambling the sea to last me for some time. For many days I was satisfied to sit still and reflect upon the danger I had been in. I should have been very glad to have had my boat again on my side of the island, but I knew not how it was practicable to get it about. As to the east side of the island, which I had gone round, I knew well enough there was no venturing that way. My very heart would shrink and my very blood run chill just to think of it. As to the other side of the island, I did not know how it might be there, but if the current ran with the same force against the shore at the east as it passed But if the current ran with the same force against the shore at the east as it passed by it on the other, I might run the same risk of being driven down the stream and carried by the island, as I had been before of being carried away from it. With these thoughts I contented myself to be without any boat, though it had been the product of so many months' labor to make it, and of so many more to get it out into the sea. We'll stop there and start next time with Chapter 9. Thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.